Today's ancient witness comes from the book of Luke, chapter 4, verses 21 to 30. When I read it, I needed a little more context, so if you'll excuse me. Jesus in Luke 4 has been into the wilderness and been tempted 3 times by Satan, has come back and started touring around Galilee, going to different synagogues and reading and preaching, and he's beginning to develop a reputation. And he, just before this, comes to his hometown of Nazareth and attends the synagogue and reads from Isaiah. And then this happens. Then Jesus said to them, "Today in your hearing, this scripture is fulfilled." All who were present spoke favorably of him. They marveled at the eloquence of the words on Jesus' lips. They said, "Surely this isn't Mary and Joseph's son." Jesus said to them, "Undoubtedly, you'll quote me the proverb, 'Physician, heal yourself,' and say, 'Do here in your country the things we heard you did in Capernaum.'" At these words, the whole audience in the synagogue was filled with indignation. They rose up and dragged Jesus out of town, leading him to the brow of the hill on which the city was built, with the intention of hurling him over the edge. But he moved through the midst of them and walked away. And then in addition, we have the modern witness from the immunologist Greta Sternberg. Emotions are always with us, but constantly shifting. They change the way we see the world and the way we see ourselves. Poetry and song are the language of emotions. Scientific precision, logic, and deductive reasoning are the language of disease.
Thank you, Bill. One of the podcasts I like to listen to is called This American Life, Ira Glass. And there's a particular episode that I enjoy called How I Got into College. Its premise is that there are many students on campus that still have a nagging question of what exactly got me into this place. It begins with an admissions officer that talks about many things not to try in the application process. In one example, they received an email from a parent saying, "My second grader has decided on a career in electrical engineering. He is leaning toward MIT, but I do not find them helpful and would prefer a Southern culture, which your school has." Another thing they see in the application process is parents emailing and calling the admissions office pretending to be their own children. They tend to use the words cool and awesome. Dead giveaways. Well, the story then shifts to a Bosnian-born professor at the University of Chicago named Emir, and how a library book got him into his dream school. He came to the United States as a refugee during the Bosnian War in the early 90s. Emir thinks of it as a series of accidents and good fortunes that he found himself where he is. It's a story he loves to tell and includes a particular high school teacher who changed the course of his trajectory. She got him out of one school and into a prestigious private school. He then went on to Harvard, eventually to become a brilliant scholar of economics. The twist is that the way he tells the story is different than the way his teacher tells it. He thought he got out by the skin of his teeth, but she knew he was destined for great things. She says, it's as if the more he told the story, the more grateful he became. And as I thought about our gospel text for the day, I couldn't help but notice all of the different voices in the text. And it reminded me that it's so easy to get lost and overwhelmed by all the voices around us, especially those voices that try to shape our perspectives on our own stories. Some are helpful and others are downright destructive. Yet it is so hard to avoid what seems inevitable, that there are always going to be difficult voices around us. Some voices we will disagree with, and there will be some that frustrate us, and yet others will penetrate inside us and cause us to change perspectives and to see the world differently. What do we do to hear the voice of Jesus? The people who heard those scandalous words about who would be welcome into God's family, those in the text, the Gentiles, the outsiders, the just world for all, they were incensed because they did not hear what they expected to hear from one of their own. They heard a different story that did not match up with what they had assumed about God. And it was especially upsetting because it was from one who was a prophet of God and who happened to be from their hometown. Perhaps like us, they were caught up in an attention economy that kept them distracted and worried. But not everyone responds to the gospel. Sometimes it's hard to hear and respond to the challenge and provocation of the good news when it comes to boundaries that are put up. Boundaries around communities and some of the stories we tell about ourselves. The truth is, though, that God's voice shapes us. Sometimes we can get in our own way and we can miss what's right in front of us. And Jesus said, today this gospel is being fulfilled in your hearing. Here Jesus is emphasizing a hearing rather than a seeing. We are created in the image of a God who longed for companionship. And sometimes it's easy to forget that the God we know and love created us through their voice, that the breath of God spoke us into existence. And in that very act and in that very wind, we became God's handiwork and God's art. It's in our flesh and our blood and our cells and in our skin. And in this way, we are all artists. We all contribute to the tapestry of love and to the goodness in the world. And God longs for us to know ourselves and God and all of God's creation in this way. In 2018, the NYU School of Medicine announced that it would be offering a full tuition scholarships to all current and future students in its medical doctor degree program, regardless of need or merit. It was a bold effort to simultaneously address the rising costs of medical education and still attract the best and brightest students to careers in medicine. And it was made possible by the generosity of alumni and trustees. And when I heard this some time ago, I immediately recognized the voice of Jesus. It's a way to make medical school accessible to a broader range of applicants with the hopes of transforming medical education nationwide, to increase diversity and to address student debt. Emotions are always with us. It's a natural reaction to get frustrated when we don't get into the places we want, or when the voices around us get the best of us. Greta Sternberg is a doctor who studies the body's immune response. She notes that poetry and song can actually change the way we feel. It helps us to connect to a deeper sense of the divine and alleviate the pressure that comes about from stress. It's like medicine for the soul. And much like a beautiful sunset, it leads to that sense of wonder and awe, this medicine. Birds chirping, dogs barking, these sounds of peace. All can be found when we stop, look, and listen. Poetry, peace, and song all attempt to describe that which is indescribable. Now, the early Christians came to experience the presence of Christ with them in communion as life-giving. And they spoke of communion as medicine for what ails us. They believed that consuming the bread and the wine shored up and mended the frail human condition. And to come to communion was to be diagnosed, to be admitted, treated, and released to a new regimen of health and resilience, body, mind, and soul. It vaccinated them against the estrangement that destroys human solidarity and staved off infections like a divided heart and moral indifference. And they knew the medicine was taking because the proof lay in the service. The church's body was healing when it found itself caring about and tending to bodies, defending people against injury and violence, dehumanization, and contempt. It could claim health only when it was putting its own body on the line. In closing, I'll say that Jesus is bringing good news to the world, this God's era of healing and wholeness, today in our midst, and we too can be a part. Thanks be to God.